Hey, everybody, this is Erin Patrice, and this is Hey Bay City.
Erin, you are just one of my absolute favorite humans. I'm just going to be totally transparent and open up this conversation by saying that you're one of my favorites. Do you remember how we first met?
I think Courtney, maybe?
Yeah, Courtney Soul.
Connected us, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, because she sent me a message and said something like, hey, I've got somebody that you absolutely need to talk to.
Yes, and then that's when we did the interview.
Yeah, we did our first podcast probably 2 years ago now.
Yeah, it's probably been about 2 years. Wow.
Goodness.
Yeah.
And I love you. I love your heart. I love the work that you're trying to do in so many communities. And that work is coming here to Bay City.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited about that. But I think it's important for everybody listening to really kind of lay the groundwork for the work, because I love your work, but it's also I don't want to say uncommon, but it's pretty uncommon.
Has a little different spin to it.
Yeah, because you're getting into these communities and you're creating this situation where people can talk and have really open conversations about really important issues that we don't typically ever get to talk about. So I think it's important to lay the groundwork first. And I'm not entirely sure that in our first interview, we really got into your personal history. I think maybe we went only back as far as your professional history. So I'd love to kind of dive into your personal history, because am I correct that you grew up in Cincinnati?
I did.
Okay,
yeah.
Tell me about that, growing up in Cincinnati.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, right in the inner city in Roseline, Bond Hill area. And, I always like to, when people ask about my history, I like to talk about me being adopted, right? Because...
Oh, you're adopted. I didn't even know that. Okay,
yeah.
Tell me more.
So that really laid a lot of this, I guess, layer of wanting to belong, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at a very young age, I asked the question, where do I belong? Because even though I was adopted into a wonderful family, my family, right? And they loved me, accept me. And sometimes you would forget that you were even adopted, right? Because nobody ever made any type of difference between you or someone else. It was still in the back of my mind all the time that I was different because I was so visibly different. I loved creativity and I was kind of a wildflower, I call myself, and just this free-flowing person. And, a lot of people in my family are very analytical and just that left brain, and I'm totally right brain. And so, and of course, the obvious things, you look different. You don't see anybody else with your features, your mannerisms, your style. And so that was always a thing for me in regards to where do I belong, right? And so even though they never made me feel like I didn't belong, it was something within myself, right?
Yeah, right.
It was almost like that origin story, like when you look at the comics or, anything, superhero movies, it says, where is your origin? Where do you come from? Because you just start at the age of 2, but what happened before that? And so I always preface it with that, because that was really, for me, the beginning of wanting to make sure everybody felt like they belonged somewhere, right?
Do you remember an age when that feeling started? Because I would imagine, and this is me speaking as someone who is not adopted, I would imagine that early on, your family is your family, and I love everybody, and they're my family. Was there an age where you started to feel or started asking those questions of, like, where do I belong? I do love my family, but I also have this little pull towards... Was there an age when that started for you?
You know what? I don't remember an exact age because, quite honestly, some parts of my childhood are blurry, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember. I knew at a very young age that I was adopted. It was never a secret. I never, had to find out, when I was 16, found this secret paper, and then, that it didn't happen like that for me.
You're not my real mom.
Oh my goodness, like a Lifetime movie. And, and not even making fun of people that go through that, because people really do go through that. Right. That was not my experience. But I remember being in early elementary, and it would be like Father's Day or just real simple things, no big deal. And I did not have a father growing up. And so it was always this thing well, I know I had to have a dad. Mm-hmm. Where is he? So it was little things like that when people were writing their little Happy Father's Day cards. And I just was like, who would I even give one to? Mm-hmm. And so, as I don't remember an age, I do remember being very young, wondering, where did I start? So many people have like their lineage back to
Yep.
being from Scotland or from Africa, like all these different places. And I'm in Cincinnati not knowing even where I came from, let
Yeah.
alone, my lineage.
So you were adopted by your mother?
Yep.
Tell me about your mother.
So my mother she lives in Midland. She's come to
Awesome.
she supports everything I do.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah, I know, right? Yes, she is truly so supportive, and she worked in AT&T Corporation, right? She was, headquarters, the office with the view, but she worked a lot. So I was one of those latchkey kids, right? Me and my brother, we were latchkey kids where, you go home off the bus, mom's not there, you have to. Yeah. Don't turn on the stove, maybe, take out some lunch meat or something. And so she worked hard, single parent, of course. And that was by choice. She decided to adopt kids and said, hey, I'll just.
Yeah. Have you ever had a conversation with her about like why she wanted to adopt?
You know what? I think we may have. I don't remember because that was always a tough conversation. Right? Because I never wanted her to feel like I didn't appreciate what she did. Mm-hmm. So it was always this thing where I didn't really want to ask a lot of questions because I just didn't want her to feel like I'm searching for something that she didn't give me.
Right. Yeah. And especially if you have a good thing going and you have a good relationship, can make you reluctant to broach a subject that could potentially make that worse. Yeah.
And I don't even know if I even thought about it that way. I really did. I don't think I ever thought about it potentially doing that. I just always thought that it would hurt her if I asked her because it would seem like she wasn't enough. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it had nothing to do with that. It literally was me saying, there is a piece of me that I don't know, I'm not familiar with, and I need to know it just because I am naturally curious. Hence what I do. I love to know, right? And so that was always something that was important to me.
Wow. So growing up in Cincinnati, what happens next in your stage of life?
So I grew up Southern Christian, right? And Baptist is what I was trying to say, I guess. And, which was beautiful to me because that's all I knew, right? I always tell people that we are all kind of we come into this world just kind of given an identity, right? We're given who we are, right? People, if you're born into an Islamic family, you're a Muslim. You don't get to choose that, right? So we all kind of inherently do that, right? Based on what our parents want for us to do. So again, not saying anything against religion or anything. It's just what it is. So I was raised up in a Christian home and I absolutely loved it. I was totally devoted to it. I was one of those kids that did the, usher board, the choir, the young guilds, all the stuff you could do. I did it. And because of being adopted and always feeling like I was not loved the way I needed to be loved, right? And I say that because now me and my mother have discussed this. My mother is, and I think she just comes from that generation, right? Where they just didn't show a lot of outward love, right? The way that I thought it should have been shown at that age, right? Now, being an adult, being a mother myself, I see things differently from different other perspectives, right? But when I was a child, it was like, oh, I just want to be hugged more. I want to be told. And that comes from a lot of people who are in adoptive situations. Sometimes they have this sense of almost like abandonment issues.
Yeah, attachment.
Yeah, so it's this idea that I need you to show me more. Even though she paid for everything, anything I wanted I could have. So when I was 16, I met the gentleman, 7 years older than me, and got pregnant. And so with that, though, when you are in a very traditional Baptist, old school way, that was really frowned upon. And people were not happy about that when they found out. And I was basically taken out of all type of services. Like I could not, and no one ever explained it to me like, oh, you won't be able to do this. I just show up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And this is 16. This is family to me. So with me living in Cincinnati, my mother's sisters and my cousins and stuff, they all lived mostly down south. So my church family was my family. And so that was devastating. I remember just that being I was so hurt. Oh my God, are they turning their backs on me? And I just remember that so clear. It was like yesterday. It's still like very clear for me. And I just remember that feeling of that conditional love, right? That's how I viewed it. And abandonment again, right? Rejection. Yeah. So it was this idea that I'm looking for love in all the wrong places, quite naturally,
Mhm.
but I still need love. And so I dealt with that and ended up having, 3 more children, and ended up getting married at 18 because I was taught that, you can't keep coming home without. My mother never said that to me. It was just the doctrine. So, you can't keep coming home pregnant. This is in the back of my mind that I'll be judged even more. So I need to get married. Went to the courthouse, got married at 18. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm
Mhm.
just like winging it through life. And it was abusive relationship for some years. And so I eventually got out of that, and that's what brought me to Midland. So I left,
Mhm.
fled. Really, that's a whole story in all of itself. The ups and downs of that.
Yeah.
But I fled from Ohio and came here. My mother and aunt were already here. My mother had moved here maybe a couple years prior, and they both were like, they have good schools here.
Mm.
Just come here. And I visited Midland before, and I was like, I ain't moving to
Why
Midland.
did you say that?
Oh my goodness. I'm young, right?
Mhm.
At the time, I probably was 20, early 20s. I don't remember how old I was when I first moved here. Wow, I've been here quite some time. I'm 43.
Woo! 20
I
years,
just
baby.
realized that, wow, I've been
Happy
saying,
anniversary.
oh my goodness, that's crazy. Yeah, I was young, and I'm like, what am I gonna do there? Who am I gonna meet? We visited here because my aunt had lived here for decades. And so we would visit for holidays, and it just was always quiet,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Not a lot of diversity,
yeah.
not a lot of stuff to do. I'm like, why would I want to live there,
Yeah,
right?
a little bit of a situation change going from like a metropolitan area like Cincinnati to Midland. Yeah.
It was culture shock for
Yep,
me
yep.
for sure, and it was so. I always tell people this, and I don't know if I don't know, but when I first moved here, it was interesting, right? It snowed for 17 days straight, like a blizzard, right? And I
Why
went
is
it.
this happening?
I really was like, what is this? I had never seen that before in my life. Like, why does it? And it was heavy snow, like 17 days straight, right? Where it was sitting up this high. And it's funny, it doesn't even snow like that anymore here much,
Eh,
but it did when I first moved here. And I remember I had a friend that I called because she would be like, how you doing there? And I'm like, girl, I don't know what's happening right now. Now, mind you, I'm going through a divorce,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Single parent of small children. I'm trying to get acclimated to a new community that was not very receptive to me, right? This is all happening at the same time. And I'm trying to figure out who I am
Mhm.
still,
Yep.
right? I feel like I'm back in this space of who am I,
Right.
right? Did I ever answer that question?
Yeah.
And
Especially having children so young.
having kids so young.
You're already trying to form your identity, and then like we can talk as parents, like you're to a certain extent, to a large extent, your identity becomes one of I am a parent to my children,
Yeah.
and that can get you into trouble all kinds of ways just because of who am I without my kids.
And who am I even with them? I didn't know what I was doing. I was so young and
Right.
just never. I don't even know how to explain it. It was that those years were such blurs for me because I remember asking myself, I'm still asking who I am.
Hmm.
I still don't know. What am I doing here? And I remember I called this friend, and that was when the Meyer was new in Midland,
Oh yeah.
right? And I went there, it's snow everywhere, and I'm going through probably a depression. I don't know, you probably could call it that at the time. And I go into Meyer, and the door opens, and I just remember it being a sea of white faces. And I remember telling her, I said, girl, it's white inside, it's white outside. It's just like
Yeah.
seriously. And I'm not even trying to be offensive. It
Yeah.
was such a shock because I had never lived anywhere where it was no diversity in my
Right.
in my mind,
Yep.
and where I could visibly see diverse faces. I had never experienced that. I'd never experienced a place where you couldn't go and get different type of food or
Hmm.
hair products, right?
I love that you say that because I grew up in like a parochial school system, went to
Mhm.
a private high school, went to their feeder college, and it's also a very white population.
Mhm.
And I remember when you're surrounded by that becomes something that you're not aware of, and that's how humans work. That's how our brains work. Like we just become less aware of something as it's very familiar.
Sure.
And so that can be a perspective that we don't understand if we're living in a population that is 93% white. it's hard for us to wrap our brain around somebody who is not white coming into our community and saying, I feel kind of awkward here.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important perspective that you're lending, because here you are coming from Cincinnati, where you're surrounded by that level of diversity, coming into a less diverse community and immediately being aware of that. And I think that's such an important perspective to say out loud in front
Yeah.
of people, because it's an important one. And I think, and we won't get into empathy, but I think that's kind of the seed of empathy, where you can listen to somebody and say, I came here and this is how I felt.
Yeah. It was real. And I've even spoke to people who are Caucasian that grew up in diverse spaces
Yep.
that moved to Midland. And I'm
Yep,
just
right.
saying Midland as an example because
Yep.
that's where I live. But there's all kind of communities that people can move into, maybe, Philly,
Yep.
and you're from a small little town and you go there, it's culture shock, period. I had never seen a place that didn't have a second mall, like a second floor to the mall.
Wow. Yeah.
Never seen that before. So when I go there, I'm like, to me, that's a plaza, right? We call it a plaza. And so, or a strip mall, right?
Yep, yep.
So it just was different. And trying to navigate that and be a parent, right?
Yeah.
And appear as a whole person, right? Because I still have to go places. I still have to do things, right? But I was so broken at the time and kind of confused and lost. Like, where am I supposed to be? And I didn't feel Midland was a place for me at that time.
So from that moment, did you try to intentionally integrate yourself into the community, or become involved, or look for work, or how did things progress from there?
I did. I looked for work to be able to take care of my children, right? And that was its own interesting thing because people don't want to hire you. They ask you when I would go into places, they say, are you stopping through? Are you just traveling through? And it's, nope, I live here. And so that was a common question to me up to just a couple years ago. People still would ask me when I go to a, gas station or something.
Yeah.
And I think because people see my face a little bit more, I don't get that anymore. But that was a long time that people would ask me questions like that. Or if I would show up somewhere, they would say, how long was the drive? And I would say 5 minutes. I live down the street. I live down the street. So all of that was just interesting. And so, I did try to get, because I'm naturally extroverted and I like to connect with people. So I tried to find a place. I think, honestly, my whole life, right, up to a certain point, I did that subconsciously or consciously, trying to find the place, right? Where should I be? Because I always felt so odd because I thought different. I didn't get worked up about certain things that other people did because I didn't care about that. I'm like, who cares? It's so many bigger things. I was always a deep thinker, even as a child, right? I'm like, it's like whole wars going on and you care about if they stopped your M&M, that you liked. It's a so what,
And then you add that layer of rejection from that smaller community of you became pregnant and then you felt rejected by this small community that you had felt so invested in. And you layer that on top of it too. And now it really becomes a huge question of who will accept me? Where do I belong? Where's my place? Yeah.
Because you couldn't have told me that would have ever happened. I would have never believed you.
Wow.
That I would be kind of ostracized. That I would have never believed that because in my mind, it just wouldn't, I didn't even think of that. That was not even a concept for me. So that was one of my first hurts because it just was so blind, it just blindsided me. And I was like, whoa. And then I felt like a terrible person because I have this visible sin, right? Or, and it's, oh my goodness, I am just terrible. But I loved what was happening. Because I'm like, oh my goodness, people don't understand even when you're adopted, going to the doctor and they say, fill out your history. And before they even ask me a bunch of questions, I say, I'm adopted. And they just put a big X. So it's like this void.
Yep. It's more than just a lack of information. In a lot of ways, it's a lack of identity.
Yeah.
And then you layer potential health stresses on top of that. If do I have something genetic?
Well, because I'm starting to have babies,
Yep.
right? So I want to know what can I do to help them to make sure. And so I remember even my first son, he was the first person that looked a little bit like me, right? Had my nose. And I'm like, oh my goodness, right? Oh, this is me. And that was the first time that ever happened. And it just was like, oh my goodness, I'm in love with this little guy. But then I was so afraid. So I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. What am I have a baby? And I'm 17 years old. So it was a lot of stuff between the ages of like 14 to maybe 23, where it just was like, what is happening? You think about those movies where you see the person like walking, but everything around them is just like a blur.
Mm-hmm.
It's moving fast, it's moving slow, but you really can't identify anything.
Yep.
And the person is still just kind of moving. That was me. When people say existing, that's what I was doing at those ages. I was existing. I loved life. I was always happy, but I also just didn't know you know what I mean? It was
Right.
like this weird,
Yeah, well,
blur.
like where do I fit in? Where can I call home? So you're at this point where you're looking for work and
Yeah,
you're trying to become part of the community. I don't want to fast forward too much in your story,
sure, yeah.
but I really want you to tell how you came upon this work that you're doing.
Yeah.
And I just want to give some context to people that are listening or watching, in that I first came across your work even before Courtney introduced us.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, because I had kind of heard about you from some other folks, and I had checked it out. And here you are, a Black woman, interviewing white supremacists and filming that conversation and then publishing that for everybody to see. You're going in and you're having these conversations, and it's not just white supremacists,
Sure.
but like all sorts of really tough conversations that some people would say you should not have, that you should not be speaking to those people. And here you are in the middle of COVID,
Yeah.
just like jumping in head first with all of these conversations. So,
Yeah.
Take me back to when that work first started, or the seed of the idea for that work first started.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we did talk about the beginning, because that's really where that idea of belonging came from, right?
Mhm,
And I know people use that all the time now, right? Belonging, belonging, belonging.
Right.
But that started for me a long time ago, and belonging for all people. And so,
And I love that you said that, because you're coming from belonging from the definition of the lack of feeling of belonging. Because if we've gone in our entire lives like feeling like we've belonged everywhere, like I belong to my youth group, and I belong to Boy Scouts, and I belong to my church, and I belong to this work, and I belong to X, Y, and Z, you can say belonging, but somebody who has felt the opposite of that, I think, is coming from it from a different definition. So I love that.
and I will tell you something. I have never shared this part of this. Like, people know I'm adopted. People know, that I was in a certain type of relationship and that I went through some struggles, but I never have talked about that idea of that searching. I've never really talked about it this way. So I appreciate being able to do this. So fast forward to 2020. It was a hell of a year, right? Can I say that on here?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, maybe I'll try to beep it out. And if I didn't bleep it out, I'm sorry, everybody. This is a real conversation with a real
And that's a
human.
real word.
And that's a real word.
We can visualize
yeah.
that, right?
So I'll do my best to bleep it out, but
Yes.
you know what? Let's go with it.
It was a year,
Yep.
right? And I think that when we say 2020, so many things come to our mind, right? All of us.
Yep.
And what was interesting about that was that sometimes when things happen, certain groups are impacted the most. But I think with 2020, everybody was impacted in one way or the other, be it a whole pandemic, social justice stuff that happened with George Floyd, the health stuff, like, should we do this? Should we not do this? Do we take it serious? Do we not take it serious? It was a lot going on between 2020 and 2021. And I just remember, and this is something that really stuck with me, because there were groups of older women, in particular, mostly women, that were like, they were crocheters and like knitters, just sweet ladies. And they would always talk about doing crossword puzzles or something like that. And I remember seeing one of them say that somebody that all of them knew got COVID and they didn't take the shot, right? And one of them said, well, I hope they die, and that'll show them. And I remember thinking right then at that moment, wow, and I had to ask, because I wouldn't be myself if I didn't. I was not going to, because I've always been kind of raised to respect people who are older than me. But I really want to genuinely ask, do you really want that person to die? Is that really your wish? Because words have power, right? And so,
And that's a very explicit line to cross from I hold this thought or this belief or this opinion,
Yes.
whether it's proven or not or anything, but you've crossed this line into because someone has done something, I want them to die. That's a very clear line to cross. Yeah.
Yes, and because somebody feels differently than you. That's
Yep.
really what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
They do not align with your way of thinking, and now you want them to be punished for it. Even more so than what they already are. They're already sick,
Mm-hmm.
right? But now you wish for them to die. And I remember at that point was when I was like, okay, this is a lot. This is a lot. Almost to where I wanted to just kind of back away from all of it, right? No social media, no nothing, because I was tired of seeing all the combative nature,
It was
right?
so intense.
Oh, it was ridiculous. People that I never thought like that, right? On either side of it. It was all people.
Yep.
And it's so funny because the people that think they were doing the good were just as nasty,
Yep.
right? And so that was when I said, okay, I could either duck away, stay in my little corner in my house, right? Do my thing and move on with life, right? Navigate through this thing the best way I can, or I can do something about it, right? I can complain or do something. So that was when I said, well, the first conversation was getting some teachers together to talk to parents, because that was the first time some parents had become the teacher, because that was when school shut down. People had to like basically homeschool their children, and people were going crazy about that. Like, I got to have, Larry at home all day.
I really love my kids, but maybe not this much.
Yes. And a lot of people either really learn to really value teachers more after that and what they go through and what they give. I shouldn't say go through, but just what they give, right? And so, yeah. So that's how that started. We started conversations. I said, let's be kind of a little bit more proactive, even though I was a bit reactive. But I said, okay, we can move in the proactive by having different conversations. Just keep it going. And so people can come together. But the thing that I saw and what was so interesting is that the very people, and this was my own experience, the people that preached inclusion, right? Diversity, equity, we know, all of those words, right? They were the people that were some of the nastiest ones, right? Not wanting to hear anybody. If that person said they're not taking whatever, right? They're not wearing a mask. People were wishing death. They were wishing that they get COVID. That was like extreme to me. And I said, wow. And so that was when I realized that people on all different sides had some work to do, including myself. We all had work to do. We had to find a way as adults to sit down and talk without it becoming death. It's either we don't say anything or we wish death. Like it's got to be something in the middle for us to be able to do this. And that was my thought process.
Were you the first conversation you said was about like parents and kind of school? Was it specifically pandemic related, or was it just okay?
No, it was definitely I specifically got people to talk about how to become the new teachers. That was the title of it, like something like that.
Well, do you remember the second conversation that you had?
So if I'm thinking about what you're talking about, maybe. So the first time I had an in-person conversation with someone was at a rally that Midland had. And that was, what's so funny about it is that was me literally just being myself. I just naturally am kind of curious, and I don't like people to feel like they are being isolated. I just don't like it. And
so this was a rally put on by citizens in Midland?
So this was, I forget the name of the group now, I'm sorry. But there was a couple groups that came together to put on this rally. That was really in the height of everything with George Floyd. And it was a big rally that was put on in Midland to show unity, right, for George Floyd. And for people, of different colors, backgrounds, ethnicities, all that good stuff. And so they asked me to speak being a mother of 4 Black sons, right? So I said, sure. So went there, and after I was done speaking, just kind of walking around, because it was tons of people. It was, I would have never thought that many people would come to, it was like surprising. It was so many people in the streets and down, it was insane. And so I'm walking around saying hi to people and whatever. And I remember seeing people's body shift. Because I try to be pretty observant and watch things, and I'm watching people's body shift, and I'm like, what is going on? So me, naturally, I'm looking towards what's happening. And I see this gentleman, and he has this AR-15 like strapped across his chest. He has a pistol, and I saw that as I got closer, a pistol and a knife in like his pockets. And he has like the NRA hat, and this is nothing against NRA. I'm just painting a picture, right? So he has the NRA hat and this beard, and it's just a look that some people, if you profiled him, made some assumptions, you would think, oh man, this guy means business. And so I went up to him because I remember people giving him looks, right? And to me, he didn't even look like I hope he's not offended by this, but he didn't look scary. He reminded me of one of my sons. I don't know. He just had a young face, and he looked a little bit like, I'm not going to say nervous, but he didn't look comfortable. Some people with guns, when they stand there, you could tell they mean business, right? Yeah. He didn't have that look. And so I remember walking up to him, introducing myself, telling him, hey, I'm Erin Patrice. I just want to ask you some questions. And I forget how it actually started, but he kind of introduced himself. And I remember when he first started, his shoulders was kind of naturally defensive, right? What does she want? Because mind you, I had my hair wrapped like this,
right.
And I'm walking up and as myself, right? And I told him, I said, I'm really cool. This is cool, right? I don't expect anything from you. I just want to know, what's up? What's going on? I see you with all the stuff. Talk to me. And he started talking, and I think we talked maybe for about 15 minutes, and we actually found some things we agreed on and some things that we maybe didn't. He told me he was there to protect his friend's pawn shop. And I said, that makes sense. With what was going on in the world at the time, people were, tearing up buildings and things of that nature through their protests. And so I understood his perspective. And I also, excuse me, I'm also around people who believe in being able to protect their home, right? And their person and whoever is around them. So we were able to talk on that. And it was so funny because as the conversation went on, you could see his shoulders like kind of settling. And I found out because I left. I didn't stay for the whole thing. I found out that he stayed and then helped clean up afterwards. So that was really cool.
I'm interested to ask you this. Did that conversation change you or influence your perspective or your thought process or your commitment to this kind of work at all? And if so, in what way?
It definitely did. It was really interesting because, again, when I saw him, he reminded me of one of my sons. And I thought about how everybody looked at him almost like he was a leopard. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Yes, I understand why people were put off. Some people are very uncomfortable around guns. In Midland, we don't see that a lot, right? Somebody walking around with 2 guns and a knife. So I understood the pause and concern, but I also could feel him. He was there by himself. Nobody was with him. He came alone. And I thought, I know what that feels like to be somewhere and nobody come up and talk to you. People kind of look at you like, why are you here? I know what that feels like. And again, I get why people did it. It's not a, diss to them for doing it. But I know what that other side feels like, right? And I didn't want him feeling like that. And I felt like he was there for his own reasons. I don't have to always understand a person's reasons, right? But I also don't have to treat them bad because they feel differently than me.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what catapulted everything, that particular conversation, because I filmed it because I asked him for permission. Do you mind if I film this? And that was kind of when I was getting started with things. And he said, sure. But other people took pictures. Other people paid attention to it because heard later that people were afraid for me. I'm like, I didn't feel any fear with him. I didn't feel like he was going to, I just didn't feel that, right? But I think, again, that goes to the message of what we do is that I also didn't come to him with aggression.
Right.
I didn't come to him trying to squabble or have beef, right? I came to him very humble. Well, I hate saying that, but you know what I mean? Just kind of like sincere, right? And so I think that he fed off of that because if I would have came differently, what are you doing here? Quite naturally, he would have defended himself.
Yeah.
All of us would. So
what I also I appreciate about you in that situation as well, in that we have a tendency to automatically jump to assumptions and motivations about people, and we do that instinctively to fill in blanks that aren't filled in. And part of that is just how our brain works, like judging a book by its cover in all the ways that you can apply that. It serves us good in some context.
Sure.
It makes life efficient, and it gives us accurate. It keeps us out of dangerous situations. All of these
Safety,
things.
yeah.
And so that's how our brain is wired. But I think also what I love about you in this situation is that here was an opportunity where all it took to have to allow someone to fill in those blanks for themselves was simply opening up an environment of communication rather than conflict. Like you said, if you came in looking for conflict, you would have gotten what you wanted,
Yeah.
because that's how we work. If somebody's coming ready to fight, you're going to fight back in whatever way that is.
Yeah.
But instead, you approached it with a desire for communication.
Yeah.
And that, I think, I would love to sit him next to you.
I would love to know how to find him.
If you are listening to this, send us a message, because I would love to talk to him and see how, from his perspective, how did that go down? What were you thinking?
Yeah.
What did you first think compared to what did you think after? And has it changed your mind about anything or influenced your thought about anything since then? It would be fascinating.
Yeah.
But I think the point is that the communication has to be the first step. That we have to lay all our cards out on the table and say, why are you doing this? Why do you think you're doing this?
Yeah.
Here's what I think about this. Let's talk about this in an open way. And now when we have all the facts out on the table and everybody's stories and their motivations, now we have something to work with, as opposed to running around kind of insinuating and assuming things about people.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that's also such a big lesson for us all, is that we don't always get that follow-up, right?
Right.
That moment is where it counts, right? I always try to liken it to growing up, we rode the city bus a lot, and sometimes you wait at that bus stop and there's somebody sitting next to you. You have no idea if that person is a PhD or a janitor or a single mother. You don't know. You just meet Dolores. She's sitting there with you and you start talking, right? And how you approach that moment it means everything, because you may never see Dolores again, but you may have left, right? Some kind of imprint on Dolores and vice versa, right? So I think that's part of what that meant to me, is that for us to really take advantage of those moments and not always look for this battlefield, right?
Yep.
Some of us want to fight about everything. Relax, right? Because honestly, again, he didn't come there to shoot anybody. In his mind, he felt like he was doing what was right.
He was protecting his friend's business.
Yeah. He thought he was doing right. And who am I to say he wasn't, right? So I feel like I'm doing right with different things. And I think that's the part that we are not able to sometimes give each other the same grace that we would want, that we would wish for, long for. Give me that same grace. And so, yeah.
That kind of dovetails to a subject that we've talked about in the past, and I absolutely love, is one of humility, and especially within the context of intellectual humility. And we will absolutely get to that conversation in part 2 of our interview, and we're going to really dive into this really fantastic series that you've done in Midland, and now through a partnership with the Bay Area Community Foundation, you're bringing to Bay City. It's called Including You. Here's just a quick 101 for the folks listening at home. It's a year-long conversation of all different kinds of people coming to a table and talking about an important topic. Number 1, societal expectations. Number 2, bias and judgment. Number 3, empathy and tolerance. 4, honesty and transparency. 5, morality, ideology and religion. 6, the greater good, the big picture. And what I love about this is here's an opportunity for us within this community to talk about these big, critical issues that are hard to define. You can't put them on a spreadsheet, but we have to talk about empathy and we have to talk about tolerance. But where else can you talk about that? Well, we can talk about it on social media. not always the best environment to have
Yeah.
in-depth conversations, but you're going to be facilitating this year-long conversation, and it's going to be so fantastic. So in part 2, we're going to talk about the work and how it started in Midland and what you've seen over the course of that work, and then what you're looking forward to in including you here to Bay City. And so I want to thank you so much for this conversation.
Yeah.
If people are listening to this right now and they're like, oh, I can't wait, I want to get more, Erin, where can they find you, and where can they kind of check things out before they listen to part 2 of our interview?
Sure. So they can see us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and also our website is tbbv.org. So that's the Breaking Bread Village, tbbv.org.
Amazing. Amazing, as always, talking to you, Erin Patrice. I can't wait till our second part of our conversation. And thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you.